Hola, bienvenidos a la temporada 3 de Inercia Podcast.
En esta temporada lo que quisimos hacer, dado que nuestra audiencia no solo se ubica en México, sino en LATAM, en Estados Unidos y en Europa principalmente, es darle un enfoque más regional a todos los episodios que grabemos. Por eso decidimos traer invitados e invitadas que reflejen esta realidad y los invitamos a esta nueva realidad de Inercia Podcast.
Quédense a escuchar este episodio y todos los de la temporada 3 y recuerden, si les gusta, denle seguir para que siempre estén al tanto de los nuevos contenidos.
So welcome to Inercia Podcast. Today we have the honor to talking to Raj Sisodia, who is the co-founder of the Conscious Capitalism movement and the author of several impactful books, such as the one titled Conscious Capitalism. So welcome, Raj. And probably before we start, I saw one of your alumni talked about this, and it was very inspiring to me to understand why doing such practice. So before we start, why meditating before a class in conscious capitalism?
Well, thank you, Patricio and Paulina. It's wonderful to be with you. I'm looking forward to our time together. I think one of the practices I use very often before giving a talk or before some classes, it's a form of meditation. It's called a presence practice. And the purpose of that is to make sure that we are fully present. Not just our body is there, but our mind and our heart and our spirit is all fully aligned and fully present in this moment. Because as we know, our minds are incredible things and they can wander off into the future and to the past, 1,000 miles away. And likewise, we may not be connected from our heart and our spirit in what we're doing. And I find that nothing impactful happens in life unless we are fully present in mind, body, heart, and spirit. And if we can get all of those things together, then the power of that moment gets really amplified. And so we go through a pretty practical, simple, but powerful practice which grounds people in the moment. We go through a series of affirmations. First of all, get them to slow down their breathing, get them comfortable in their body, visualize their mind as being crystal clear and uncluttered with other thoughts. And then they do these affirmations that there's nothing to defend, there's nothing to fear, there's nothing to promote in this moment. The only reality of this moment is that I am here now, that everything I need comes to me, everything I need is within me, everything I need flows through me. And I'm here fully in service of that which seeks to emerge in this present moment into the world through my presence. And so when you do that, you shift from an ego state to a state of service. You shift from anxiety and fear to really being not self-conscious at all. And I think it really does change the quality of the experience for everybody in that.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's really cool. I would have loved to have a class with you in university, because now I've been being able to see that practice more in different, symposiums or different meetings for entrepreneurs or people in different businesses, because they're trying to really get people attention here, right? Like they're actually present and conscious of what they're going to be learning or what they're going to be discussing. And I believe that people really, sometimes in Mexico, it's not such a common practice. So they might at first be surprised, but when they do it, they start the day or they start the activity with a different energy, I would say. But in Inercia, we really like to talk about who's the person behind all this story you're going to be telling us. So I would love to ask you, who are you? Who is Raj? And how did you end up creating this conscious capitalism movement? What inspired you to embark on this journey?
Yeah, and I think that is a very important place to start. The journey of self-awareness does start with who am I? What makes me unique? What makes me different from anybody else who has ever lived? I read an estimate that there have been 117 billion human beings on this planet, including 8 billion today, but 109 until now. So every one of them is different. That's the wonder of nature, right? Every leaf on every tree is different. Every creature is different. Nature does not replicate exactly the same way. And therefore, there's a uniqueness and a distinctiveness to each of us. And it takes us a while to figure out what that is. There's a journey. The book I'm writing right now is about that process of self-discovery. There's 7 steps, starting with know yourself. Then you have to love yourself, be yourself, etc. We can get into that later if you would like. But so my journey is an unusual one in many ways. I was born in India, in a really small village with no electricity or running water. I was born into this landed aristocracy kind of family. My grandfather owned a lot of land. He was kind of the overlord of the village. My uncles, everybody had little titles, so they were privileged in that system. And that's where and we come from the warrior caste in India. India has this caste system that you're born into, which I think is one of the worst things really about India in many ways. It gives you a false sense of ego if you're born into one of the higher castes, and it relegates you to a life of subjugation and misery if you're born into the lowest caste. So I happen to be born into the warrior caste, which comes from a tradition of being warriors and kings. So it's a very feudal, very, very masculine energy dominated subculture within it. And I say that because it's important. I was born into a very toxic version of a masculine patriarchal system. And I had to experience that so that 50 years later, I would write a book about the feminine. Because if I didn't experience the toxic side of that, I would not have the sensitivity to think about why we need more of the feminine. So I was born there, lived in India until I was 7, and my father had gone away. He had escaped that system, and he was a brilliant student, so he ended up getting to Canada for his PhD. And he came back to India when I was 7. So I didn't know my father until I was 7 years old. And then he got a job in Barbados, so we left India, moved to Barbados in the Caribbean. He was working on sugarcane research, and then 2 years later, we moved to California. So not far from Carmel, you were talking about. So that's Monterey County. We were living in a town called Salinas, very close to that area for 2 years. And then 1 year in Canada after that. And then we went back to India. So when I was 7 to 12, we were abroad in the West, and then went back to India. And so I had this interesting growing up experience of living in 2 different cultures back and forth. So India until I was 7, the West from 7 to 12, then back in India from 12 to 23, and then coming back to the West at 23 for my PhD at Columbia University. And so I kind of have this simultaneous insider and outsider perspective, I feel, anywhere that I am. I feel very much at home in India. I feel very much at home in the US or even Mexico. But I'm also able to look at it objectively to some degree. There's an outsider lens that I use or have. And so I was able to see many of the negative aspects of the Indian culture. But then when I came here back as an adult, I could see in the 1980s when I started my PhD, the business culture was really ramping up towards this whole idea that greed is good and profit is the only thing that matters. And, it was the decade of Wall Street, that movie in which that famous speech was made, greed is good. Ronald Reagan, in the White House. I mean, this was about raw capitalism, right? Milton Friedman's idea. And I could see the excesses of that. It was all about making money and nothing else mattered. And the negative consequences on people, on their being, on society, on the planet, none of those were really relevant for most businesses. They didn't factor that in. But I always had a sensitivity towards those things. So I was always asking, what is the impact of this way of being, or the way we think about business? And I was a marketing PhD student, right? So I was looking at marketing. Especially in the US, marketing was crazy in those years. It still is in many ways. The US was like less than 4% of the world's population, and maybe 70% of the world's marketing dollars were being spent in the US. Every customer, every citizen was being exposed to 2,000 to 3,000 advertising messages a day. And we were spending $1 trillion on marketing in 2004 per year. Now, for comparison, the GDP of India that year was $700 billion. So the US was spending more on ads and coupons and junk mail than 1 billion people were living on in India. Right? And I said, what are we getting for all of this? So over time, as I became a professor, I started to do my research. I was looking at marketing ethics, marketing efficiency, effectiveness, productivity, and the net impact of marketing on society. And I found the answer was very negative. That we spend enormous amounts of money and that it actually is not having a positive impact on people's well-being. on societal well-being or even companies' financial performance. It was not serving any of those, and it was having many, many negative impacts. We were using women's bodies to sell products, for example. That leads to eating disorders and body dysmorphia and depression in young women, right? And it creates a whole false way of being. And there are many other aggressive marketing of junk food and sugary cereals to children, right? And getting them addicted and creating these metabolic diseases like diabetes and so many others that are exploding in our society, the rise of obesity, and now all the anxiety and depression and all those kinds of things. A lot of it has to do with mindless consumption and mindless marketing and lower consciousness way of being business. And so I was always asking the question, is there a better way? And that's a very important question, I believe, to ask about anything in life. Because the answer is always yes. There is always a better way. It doesn't matter what you're doing and how good it is. There is a better way to do it. And so when I was thinking about that in the context of marketing and business, I ultimately led me to do research that asked a simple question in the beginning. Most companies are spending a lot of money on marketing and ads and coupons, and yet their customer loyalty is low and falling. And customer trust is plummeting overall. Spending was going up, customer loyalty and trust were falling rapidly. So I was looking for the opposite. Which are the companies that don't spend much money on marketing and yet their customers love them and are loyal to them? And I found a half dozen companies to begin with, and I started to do detailed case studies on them. Try to understand how are they managing this marketing function. I soon found that they're not really thinking about marketing. They're just thinking about the well-being of their customers. Right? So Whole Foods was a good example, right? So they were spending 5% of the industry average on marketing. So 95% less. And yet they had some of the highest levels of customer loyalty and trust. Right? And what I found was that not only were the customers loyal and trusting, so were employees, so were suppliers, and communities welcomed and embraced these companies. Right? So they were embedded in a stakeholder universe. They cared about the well-being of all of their stakeholders. And what made that connection happen to all their stakeholders was this sense of a shared higher purpose. We're all here trying to do something meaningful, and everybody believes in it, and the core values that guide us are also values that resonate with our customers, with our employees, with our suppliers, and even with our investors. So I discovered the pillars of conscious capitalism as I was doing that research. And that book went from being a marketing book. It was called The Shame of Marketing at one point, because that was a phrase used by Drucker. That marketing is supposed to look after the well-being of customers, and if they have to organize against companies, that means we're failing. And ultimately, the book was published as Firms of Endearment, how world-class companies profit from passion and purpose. And it led me to discover my purpose, because as I was writing some of those stories of these companies, I was literally moved to tears. I was emotionally connected to my work for the first time. My heart was connected and opened up to my work. I had never experienced tears of joy connected to my work. I had often experienced frustration, disappointment. But I knew in that moment that my body is telling me something. Your body knows more than your mind does sometimes. And my body was telling me this really matters to you. That's why we have tears, right? And if it matters to you, it matters to many other people as well in the world. And so in that moment, I said, this is what I want to dedicate the rest of my life to. Telling this story of business, a story of business based upon love and meaning and purpose. And that business can be rooted in those things. And at the end of our research, we found that these companies were far more successful financially, like 9 times over 10 years in terms of stock market returns for these firms of endearment compared to the market as a whole. So it was not a trade-off between saying you can choose to be a profit-oriented, profit maximizing company, or you can choose to be a loving company. That this is the path to real profits, true profits. And so that then, though I discovered the principles of conscious capitalism through that, and I met John Mackey because I had written about him in that book. He loved that book and asked me to spend a day with him. He's the CEO of Whole Foods. And at the end of that day, I shared my vision for what I was calling the Institute for New Capitalism, or INC, I-N-C, one of my many acronyms. And he looked at it and he said, that's exactly my vision, but I like the phrase conscious capitalism, which I had never heard. So that's how we decided to start Conscious Capitalism. This was October of 2007. We had a retreat at John's Ranch in February 2008, and we had our first conference in October 2008. And since then, it has grown into a global movement. And we have chapters in 25 cities in the US and about a dozen other countries, including Mexico. So that's the origin story.
So I'll go deeper into one thing you said within your perspective as an outsider. We have a key player, right? And these are enterprises or companies. And it's very interesting to see in your book and your work to call enterprises as these heroic figures. You were mentioning before Whole Foods, right? And maybe understanding why companies are these heroic figures and how a company like Whole Foods exemplifies this concept. It could be great to understand one of the key concepts of conscious capitalism.
Sure. So when we say heroic, what do we mean by that? Somebody who changes the world for the better, who takes on a grand ambition, who has an audacity to dream about changing something that seems so entrenched and so overwhelming, and yet they take on that challenge. And if they succeed, that's a heroic thing that they've accomplished. So, sending a man to the moon was a heroic act. Then President John Kennedy created that vision. That was a heroic thing. It took hundreds of thousands of people working over decades to bring about that dream. So if I look at a company like Whole Foods, which was predicated on the idea that what we put into our body makes a difference to our health, and the health of our food system, and the health of our planet ultimately. And that we need to change that if we're going to have healthy humans living on a healthy planet. And Whole Foods has been able to make a dent, make a shift in the food consciousness in the world, in America certainly. The rise of natural and organic foods, and growth of vegan and other things, and animal humanity towards animals, right? Treating animals humanely, etc. All of that is part of the ethos. And so they have definitely impacted. Because of them, Walmart now has a big section on natural organic. Because of that, we have a much greater commitment now to sustainable and regenerative agriculture in the world. And so I would say that they have made a difference. They've probably improved the health and maybe increased the lifespan of the average American, maybe by 2-3 years. Their net impact, not just directly, but indirectly as well. So I think that's a heroic thing. You are able to shift the needle on something as important as our bodies and our health. If you think about other companies, Steve Jobs famously said he wanted to make a dent in the universe, right? Make a difference. I would say Apple, in many ways, through their pioneering innovations and how much they have embedded themselves into our lives, and the way in which we have been able to now do things that we could not imagine doing before. I think that's pretty heroic. I think Henry Ford, even though he was a complicated character in other aspects of his life, but in terms of what he had as a vision for democratizing the automobile industry, making it not a luxury item for a few people, but something that everybody can afford. So he doubled the pay of his workers, and he reduced the price of the car from $1,200 to $160 over time by using highly efficient means of production, and so that the workers in the factory could drive home in the car. So that democratized. And similar story is Southwest Airlines. When they came in, 90% of Americans had never flown. And why? Because it was expensive, it was scary for many people, and not accessible. They were living in towns that were not served by it. Southwest Airlines made it accessible, affordable, and fun. Right? And now if you look at the net impact, taking an airplane is like taking a bus now. 90% of Americans routinely fly. Right? So it has democratized air travel. So their tagline for many years was, "You are now free to move about the country," right? Giving people the freedom to fly. They say, we're not in the airline business, we're in the freedom business, etc. So these are heroic ways of thinking and being. And I think these are large companies. They weren't large to begin with, but ultimately became large companies. But I think every company can be heroic in its own way. And I do believe entrepreneurs are the heroes of the modern world, because they're the ones who take enormous risks. They put everything on the line. They devote their blood, sweat, and tears. They have a sense of mission and are motivated to do something. And ultimately, it's about improving people's lives, making a tangible impact for the positive in people's lives. I think those are the heroic businesses. Now, some businesses that come along and just get you addicted on junky things, those are not heroic. They might be successful, but that's not heroic. Heroic requires you to elevate people and show them a better way, right? And then make that a reality.
And just because the name of the movement is conscious capitalism, I wanted to understand, when did capitalism stop being conscious? Where did we go wrong? I know that most of us around the world study one of Adam Smith's books, which is The Wealth of the Nations, and the other book is usually not mentioned or forgotten or not studied at all. So we see this theory of moral sentiments connecting more with this consciousness about capitalism, about this system that we have proclaimed for more than a century, and maybe just understanding when did we embark different pathways between what could be a conscious capitalism and where we are now.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful what you said, Patricia, because he did write these 2 books. The theory of moral sentiments was written 17 years before The Wealth of Nations, and he considered that his masterwork. And that was about the human need to care, that human beings have a need and desire to see the well-being of others without regard to self-interest. Right? I want you to be happy and healthy, not just for what it's going to do for me, but because I'm a human being and that's how I'm wired. We're wired to care. We're wired to be altruistic, to be cooperative, and many other things. What makes Homo sapiens the unique species that we are? But, the other book was all about pursuing your self-interest, right? And freedom. Wealth of Nations was all about freedom. Freedom leads to prosperity. What's sort of this tagline of Wealth of Nations? If you create a system rooted in individual freedom, that will ultimately lift up most elements of society. The way I say it is that capitalism had a mother and a father. And they were both Adam Smith. Right? The father energy was Wealth of Nations, which was about achieving and striving and doing in the world and pursuing your dream. The mother energy of caring and compassion and ethics and morality was in the theory of moral sentiments. Now, we live in a world in which what have we done almost for all of human civilizations? It has been a very masculine energy dominated world. It's been a male dominated world, right? And most of us want to follow the dreams of our fathers. We want to follow in that path, and we take our mothers for granted. And that is just something that they do, and that doesn't really matter. Ultimately, it matters more than anything else, actually. That's where life comes from. That's where significant comes from. And we need both. But what we did was we left out the mother energy. So if we left it out of capitalism, and capitalism, in the early days, the business leaders were very religious people, most of them like everybody in society, right? So they brought in a lot of ethics and morality that way. They were paternalistic. They cared about their workers just as a Christian might, or a Judeo-Christian ethic, or even in the Indian tradition, you had that. But then over time, it became amoral. Ethics and morality were separated from it. The profession of economics got invented. It did not exist when Adam Smith was there. He was not an economist. There were no economists. He was a moral philosopher. And the profession of economics came around, and they started to study what makes a successful economy and a successful company. And they found they were highly profitable, and therefore they, at some point, developed theories that put profit as the purpose, that the purpose of the firm is to maximize profits, right? And that became hardwired into many people's thinking. And so you started to see now the relegation of that mother energy, the caring side, the ethics, morality, spirituality elements were all shunned aside. And simultaneously, if you look on the political side, the United States was born as a country rooted in freedom, right? That's why in the same year that Adam Smith published Wealth of Nations, 1776, was the birth of the United States. The Declaration of Independence happened that same exact year. And he was talking about freedom leads to prosperity, and here was a declaration that was about religious freedom, political freedom, and economic freedom. The first society in the history of the world that was created based on a set of ideas and ideals. all of which revolved around freedom and dignity for ordinary people, right? And so, but then if you look at the democracy that was created, which was also unique in the world at that time, women were not given the right to vote, right? And so women were excluded from the world of business and the world of politics. There was a very famous exchange of letters between John Adams, one of the founding fathers of the US, and his wife, Abigail Adams, in which she said, "Please, sir, do not forget the ladies. Okay? Do not remember, what is important and make sure that women are given their proper rights in this world." And he laughed it off. And it took another 140, 1920s when women got the right to vote, right? So 140 plus years before that wrong was righted. And so as a result, what happened was that simultaneously you had a country in which the political side and the business side was hyper masculine, right? And in the absence of the feminine, what happens? The masculine, healthy masculine energy of courage and striving and, or resilience and focus and all of that, the absence of the feminine, it becomes toxic. It becomes hyper masculine. Domination, aggression, hyper competition, winning at all costs. Everything becomes a damn war when you just have masculine energy, right? War is war, business is war, sports is war, everything is war. And that's what I think we've had. The US created an extremely masculine energy dominated culture. And then it got exported to the rest of the world because the US did succeed, in many ways, materially, and innovations and so forth. And so that kind of became the dominant narrative. I think that is something that we have to change because we are missing a very important element. It's like the bird of humanity has been flying now for millennia with one wing tied up behind the back. It's only flying on one wing. And, if you only try to fly on one wing, you don't go very far and you have to become violent and aggressive to stay afloat. I think the bird of humanity can now soar once we release the feminine wing and allow it also to have its role. And that's a big part of the story. Consciousness also means being loving, being mindful, being awake, being inclusive. That means bringing in that missing dimension of what it means to be a human being. Every one of us has a father and a mother, and yet we neglect that mother energy. Even the women in the world were taught to basically only embody masculine energy. That's how you succeed. And so it created a very toxic and very, very unhappy and unhealthy environment. And that's why we're destroying the planet, and that's why we're destroying each other, and we're killing each other. There's so many wars in human history. It is an excess of masculine.
And one thing that I really like about your work is that conscious capitalism is a pro-business movement, right? Like, because we are well aware that if there is something, some figure that has the potential to create a lot of well-being and get people out of poverty and create unimaginable things like going to Mars or artificial intelligence is businesses. So I really like the way you see it because I share that as well. In B Lab, when I was working there, this slogan they have that is use business as a force for good, right? So I believe that it makes all the sense in the world, and it wouldn't be well used, that potential, if we didn't see that there was a better way. So in order to start building towards that, um, can you tell us a little bit more about what are the pillars of conscious capitalism and what could be the benefits for a company that starts using them, or setting an example with them?
Sure. Yeah, so it's very simple. It's the four fundamental questions: the why, what, who, and how of business. And each of them has a lower consciousness answer, which is what we have lived with, and now a higher consciousness answer. So the why for a long time has been make money, right? Business is this machine. You put in people, you put in natural resources, financial resources, and outcome products and money, right? This kind of a mechanistic view of business. That business is only about one thing in society, and that's to make as much money as possible. That's a very narrow view. Business needs profit in order to be viable, to be able to grow and survive. It's like saying I need to breathe oxygen in order to live, but that doesn't mean I should maximize how much oxygen I collect and I store millions of tons of oxygen. It just means I use that in order to live my life. For businesses, profit is like oxygen or red blood cells. I need those too, right? All of these things. So profit is not the purpose. It's an outcome, one of the outcomes of a viable business. It is a test for the viability of your business model. You have to be able to generate a profit, otherwise you're not going to continue, you're not going to survive, you're not going to scale, right? But there needs to be a purpose beyond profit. Just like for each of us, it's a very empty and hollow human life, which is only defined by wanting to make as much money as possible. If that's your dream as a kid or a teenager or in college, then you're going to do more harm than good, okay, in the world. Because you're going to look to extract what you can. You will cause suffering for others. You will cause suffering for other species, other humans, for the planet, in search of just that, right? So each of us should have a higher purpose, unique to us. Why am I here, and what is going to give me greater satisfaction, and how can I make the biggest positive impact in the world? That's by connecting to my purpose and values. Likewise, every business should have that as well. Secondly is a stakeholder mindset, not a shareholder-centric approach. Thinking about the well-being of all of our stakeholders. Society should be better off, right? We start with society, our suppliers, our partners, investors, customers, employees, the environment, right? Other stakeholders, government, etc., depending on our industry. So we need to think about not how just we use them to make money for the business, but how do we create value for them and with them? Everybody should be better off as a result of interacting with this business. So we have to have a stakeholder mindset in which we look to create value at multiple levels for every stakeholder. And collectively, we create value, so much value that includes investors and everybody flourishing at the same time. It's about creating a win-win-win-win-win for all stakeholders. It's not about squeezing some and using some, right? Paying our people as little as possible, paying our suppliers as little as possible so that we can make as much money as possible. That's not a real business. That is a parasite, I believe. So stakeholder integration, a stakeholder mindset, and then aligning and harmonizing the interests of all stakeholders so that they're all flourishing as this business flourishes. The third is conscious leadership. You have to have leaders who care about the people of the organization and care about the purpose of the organization. And they're not just about power and money and their own ego. Because if you are rooted in your ego and all about power and money, the acronym I use is selfless to describe the qualities of a conscious leader. You have to go beyond the narrow self. It's about service, right? The opposite of selfless is selfish. You cannot be a selfish human being and call yourself a leader, because that means you're going to use all the people that you lead to achieve your own personal goals. That is the definition of a tyrant. That's not a leader, right? So a conscious leader is there to take people to a better place. And then the fourth pillar is the how. How does it feel to work here, which is a conscious and caring culture. Every company has a culture, whether they consciously shape it or not. But these companies have a very conscious approach to their culture. They know what values they want to emphasize. They know how they want people to behave, what gets rewarded, what gets recognized, what is not acceptable. So we create a culture with high levels of trust and authenticity and caring. Love and care. And if you look at the four pillars, what's common to all of them is the word love. The purpose must be rooted in love. Your business is an expression of your love into the world. Well, love is the most fundamental human quality. That's what we are intended to live by. Every decision we make must come from love, should be rooted in love. The well-being of our stakeholders, that's about our expression of love towards our employees, our customers, everybody. Conscious leaders are fundamentally rooted in love. I love this quote from Senator Raphael Warnock, that you cannot lead the people unless you love the people. And you cannot love the people unless you know the people. And you cannot know the people unless you walk among the people. That's a true leader. That's a Gandhi. Okay? That's a Mandela. That's a king. Martin Luther King, right? It's rooted in genuine love for people. That's what it takes to be a leader. And then the culture is also caring. So that word love is showing up in all of the four pillars. And that's the fundamental difference. That brings in Adam Smith's moral sentiments, right? Normal traditional businesses are only built on one pillar of self-interest, right? Conscious businesses are bringing in the pillar of love, caring. Human beings have a desire to express their caring into the world and receive love. And the third pillar of purpose. So it's a three-legged stool, not a one-legged stool. A one-legged stool is not very stable. Right? So that's the fundamental difference. So those are the four pillars. And if a company starts to do this, they will see dramatic changes over time. Even if you just do one of these, let's say you don't change anything, but you now have a real purpose. Not just words on a wall, but actually something that matters and means something and has consequences for how you operate and what you do. That's going to make a difference. People will be more inspired and more engaged, and you will have more innovation and more impact, which will ultimately affect the financial performance. If you just do stakeholders and nothing else, that will make a difference. If you just do change your leadership, that will make a difference. If you just change your culture, that will make a difference. When you do all of them together, they are all connected, synergistic with each other. Right? There's a multiplier effect. Right? And so that's when you start to see the dramatic outperformance, which is why in firms of endearment, it was 9-1 over 10 years. Right? It's like, wow, how is that even possible? In a competitive market, how can you outperform that much? Because you're aligning all of these dimensions together. Right? Your people are incredibly engaged. Your employee turnover is a tiny fraction of your competitors. Like Costco was 7% compared to Walmart at 70%. Your customer satisfaction is incredibly high. Net promoter scores are in the 90s. You don't need to spend money on ads and coupons and junk. You don't waste money on marketing. You don't waste money on employee turnover. You don't waste money on legal costs. You don't waste money on unnecessary administrative. Right? You save all that money, and you're paying your people well and providing them good benefits. You're spending it where it makes a difference, and you're not wasting it, right, in other areas. And all of that then turbocharges the business, and it just performs at an extremely high level. And it's not just financial. I talk about businesses create, but they can also destroy many kinds of wealth. So there's financial, but there's intellectual capital, right? Innovations, there's social capital, how much trust exists in society. There's emotional well-being for our employees and customers. There's spiritual well-being, meaning and purpose through my work. There's the impact on our bodies, physical well-being, and then the impact on the environment. All of those are impacts that businesses have, and we can have a positive impact in all 8 of those areas simultaneously. But traditional businesses just focus on making money, and everything else they see as a side effect. And I say it's very important. There is no such thing on this planet called a side effect. We do things and there are effects. Just because you call it a side effect and you put it in very small letters and say it very fast, it doesn't make it less significant. It could be the most significant impact of your business. The fact that you're destroying the rivers while you're producing textiles over here, okay, that has a much bigger impact in the world than whatever textiles you're selling, right, or the jobs you're creating over here. So you have to look at all of those impacts. You have to have a business committed to having a positive impact in each of those areas for all of their stakeholders. And that takes intentionality, and that takes consciousness. Be able to see the bigger picture. What is consciousness? Ultimately, it's about seeing the whole reality, right? When I'm not conscious, I'm operating in the dark. Say I'm in a room and there's no light. I'm not conscious. I don't know. I'm bumping into things. I don't know what I'm doing, right? Now, if you give me a little match, I can now light up this little area. Now I see reality over here. Okay? That's really only a piece of reality, but at least I'm conscious of that. If you give me a flashlight, now I can see more. If you give me a big light, above, the whole place is lit up. Now I see how everything is connected. And what I'm doing here impacts somebody over there. Or what I'm doing today will impact somebody day after tomorrow. I start to see all of that. I become conscious and aware of all of that. And once you become aware, then you have responsibility, right? Once you know, you cannot unknow. Once you know the impact of your actions, then you're accountable for those impacts.
I think all this is well connected to something. When I read it, it made a lot of sense. We see the Business Roundtable sitting on 2019 to redefine the purpose of a corporation. And this Business Roundtable, as we know, is composed of the most influential CEOs in the world, right? And they redefine as well the scope of the stakeholders. They make a broader picture of who should businesses should be focusing on. This relates to my following question, because all that you're saying right now is my question is a hypothetical case. If you could sit right now with Milton Friedman and you were having dinner, we know he received a Nobel Prize for stating like what is the purpose of a corporation and make it a clear case. But I believe of all you're saying and what we're seeing right now in the world, that is changing. And maybe understanding your perspective of if you were to sit in a table with him, what would you tell him about the purpose of a corporation?
Yeah, I think in some ways, that debate was already done or was had between John Mackey and Milton Friedman. You can find it online. It's a classic debate in Reason magazine. Friedman was basically making his case. It's only about profit, and John was talking about Whole Foods. It matters well-being of our stakeholders and purpose and all of that. And at the end, when John says, well, by the way, Whole Foods is the highest performing stock in the grocery business, and we have grown faster and been more profitable than anybody else. And then Milton Friedman said, okay, in that case, it's fine, right? As long as what you're doing is working, then you should do it. And John says, well, I would do it even if it did not result in anything, because it's the right thing to do. And I think that's where we lose out. There's an ethical and moral dimension to everything that we do in life. We have impact on other people. We have impact on the future. We have impact on other species. We are destroying other species on this planet. We are the apex species, right? We are the stewards of this planet, and we are using every other species only to serve us. And ultimately, in the long run, we are destroying our own future, because all life is connected, right? If the bees disappear, humans will disappear at some point. And so we don't recognize that when we simply make purpose. And he says you stay within the law. Well, the law doesn't always have the wisdom of what is necessary, right? And so I would tell him businesses don't just make money, they shape our lives. They pervade our lives, right? Whether when we're working at a company, they impact us, they impact our children, they impact our future. When we are buying from them, they are changing our lives, right? So they don't just make money, they impact our current lives and our future possibilities on this planet. And so why not look for a way that simultaneously does everything? We agree and believe in, as Paulina also said, the importance of business and the importance of creating financial wealth. This world does not operate without financial wealth or capital. A free society does not function without corporate profits. Right? Without profits, there's no taxes. And without taxes, there's no public infrastructure, no roads, no highways, no airports, no public health, education, right? And so governments cannot create wealth. They can only tax and spend the wealth generated by business. So wealth is important. We have to create wealth as businesses. But it matters how you make the money. Because you can make the money by squeezing your employees and squeezing your suppliers and damaging the environment and externalizing all of the true costs of your business. And you've made a profit. As I said earlier, that's not a profit. That's a parasite. You are sucking life and value out of it. We need to have true profits, which means you're not hurting anybody. In fact, you're benefiting them in other ways, and you're generating a surplus. That's a magical business, right? So I would say to Milton Friedman that all of these are simultaneously possible. Economics is founded on the notion of scarcity and zero-sum game, that if I benefit, if I win, somebody has to lose, right? And that mindset really makes everybody out to be a competitor. You think of not only your competitors, but your suppliers are competitors, your employees are competitors in some way. You're trying to get an advantage over everybody. That business is a positive sum game. It's not a zero sum game. And there's so much more is possible when you care about people. The fact is, every single conscious company, when they do kind and loving things, like in the healing organization, I wrote about 25 such companies, right? They're healing companies. They're reducing suffering, bringing more joy into the world. They're opening their hearts and doing things for people. And when they do that, the people are incredibly grateful and positively impacted. And that should be enough. But it turns out then they become more engaged and they're more innovative and they're more creative and the employee turnover goes down and all kinds of positive things happen to the business. as a result when you do that, right? But you're doing it from a place of love, not from a place of mercenary calculation. You're not saying, oh, if I do this, then my employee turnover will fall, and therefore. Some years ago, there was a cover of Harvard Business Review that said, happiness is profitable. Okay, there was a smiley face, right? The happiness is profitable. Happy employees are more productive. So many CEOs woke up and said, oh, we need more happiness around here. Before that, they never cared about happiness, right? But if you only care about happiness because it's going to make you more money, then people can see that you don't really care about them, right? The analogy I use is like asking somebody to marry you. And she says, why do you want to marry me? And you say, well, I read that married men live 5 years longer and they make 30% more money in their lifetime. So there's a great business case to get married. We should marry for love, and we should do everything in business for love as well. And make sure that the business is viable at the same time. So why you do something also matters, right? So I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier, in my business education, which, as I said, theoretically is rooted very much in economics and sociology, and mostly economics, right? It's all about the head and the wallet.
We talked about wealth as well, and I know you have done this study because I saw it somewhere, but maybe our audience hasn't. So how does this or does these principles relate to profitability with companies? Can you share the data you now possess on this research?
Well, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, with firms of endearment, that's where it started. We had 28 companies in the original book, 18 public and 10 private, and we did an analysis of public companies because we didn't have financial data on the private companies. And we looked at their performance for shareholders over a 10-year period. And we wrote down our hypothesis because we were thinking, these companies are paying their people much better, in some cases double compared to their competition. They're providing much better benefits for their employees. They're investing in their customers. They're investing in their suppliers, paying their suppliers well, investing in the local communities, investing in the environment. So we said maybe there's less profit at the end of the day because investors get paid last. And that's okay because you're creating so much value for these other stakeholders. So we were prepared to make that argument. And then we found that these companies actually outperform dramatically. We said, wow, how is that possible? And not only do they outperform, their beta, as the measure of risk, is lower. Their price-earning ratio is higher in the market, which means there's a greater expectation of growth. So these companies, they grow faster. They have better margins. Their net margins are better, even though their gross margins may not be as high. Why? Because they save on marketing, they save on employee turnover. They're paying their people well, but employee turnover is much less, so you save a lot of money there, right? So there's a whole financial angle to this. There's a good book called The Good Job Strategy by my friend at MIT, Zeynep Ton, which looks at one dimension, one stakeholder, the employees, paying people better and giving them better benefits and predictable schedule and good working environment. That actually results in significant competitive advantages to the company. Right? Your customer satisfaction is higher, stockouts are fewer, employee morale is higher, innovation is greater. All of those things happen. So again, when you do the right things for all of your stakeholders, you take care of the people take care of the business. Okay. And there's some specific mechanisms, as I said, lower marketing costs, lower employee turnover, lower administrative costs, lower legal costs. And on the other side, faster growth, faster sales per square foot, sales per employee, all of those are higher. More innovation, all of those are the factors that contribute to superior performance over time. Now, I do caution leaders that a conscious business is still a business. It must still have the fundamentals right. You have to have a good business model. You have to have efficient processes, good practices. All of that has to be there, right? You cannot replace the fundamentals with just higher consciousness and purpose. You have to be doing the fundamentals right as well. And then you add on this higher level elements of purpose and values and so forth. Then that takes the business to another level.
I wanted to actually ask you about the acronyms, one in specific that I really liked, because, in the audience, we have a lot of small and medium entrepreneurs and people who are searching for this awakening in their personal, that's going to be reflected in their professional lives, right? So the acronym I'm referring to is LIST. Could you tell us about that one, and how could anyone who's listening to us could use it in order to start, taking better decisions, maybe more conscious decisions?
Yeah, so the list came to me in a vision. I was in Ecuador in 2018. I went with the Pachamama Alliance, which is a wonderful group that connects the modern world with the indigenous world of the Amazon rainforest, and takes groups of people there for 10 days. I was with the founders, and we were deeply immersed deep inside the rainforest. We were staying with two different indigenous tribes there, the Achuar people and the Zapara. And you get immersed. First of all, the idea is to connect back to nature. We in the modern world have lost our connection to nature. We act like we exist here and then there's nature. We have separated ourselves, right? It's like we come into this world. Actually, we come out of this world. We are made up of soil, ultimately, right? Soil is what gives rise to the plants, which is on the food. That's what we eat, or the animals eat that. Ultimately, it all boils down to we come from this planet. We are as much a part of this planet as a bird or a tree or a bee, right? And yet we separate ourselves, and we have done enormous harm to ourselves and to the planet because of that disconnection that we have had with nature. So part of the purpose of this is the indigenous wisdom of living with and within nature and in harmony with nature, and being a steward of all of that life, and connecting to the spirit of things. They said to us, the shamans, many shamanic healing rituals there. And they said in the West, you just connect to each other from here, right? Head to head. So we connect from here, spirit to spirit, not only with other people, with a tree, with a mountain, with a jaguar, with a river. There's a deep, deep connection at that level, and so that's, being reminded of that wisdom. We think that all the wisdom only exists in the West, in the modern world, industrialized world. There's so much wisdom that exists and still remains today available to us. And the other part of it was an experience with ayahuasca, which is the brew that they have been using in the rainforest and other parts of America, South America, for I don't know how many thousands of years. And somehow, with all the tens of thousands of plants that exist, they figured out that if you take the roots of this plant and the leaves of this plant, and you boil them together for 3 days, it results in a psychoactive brew, which they call ayahuasca. They also call it the grandmother plant, that it connects you to Mother Earth or Mother Energy, and that you are able to gain access to wisdom and insights. It opens up your consciousness to things that you may not otherwise have access to. Now, I was writing the Healing Organization that year, 2018. The book came out in 2019. And as I was writing it, 4 women basically asked me the same question. They said, "Oh, you're writing a book about healing. What about your own healing? Have you worked on your own healing?" And I said, "Oh, I don't have time for that. I have a book deadline. In October, I have to deliver this manuscript." So I had set aside 6 months just for writing. And they said, "No, it's important. You cannot write a book about healing if you don't work on your own healing." Well, I said, "I think I'm okay. I don't think I need healing." They said, "No, everybody needs healing. And especially you." They knew me. So they knew my story. So I delayed that book by 5 months. To October, I moved it to February, the deadline. And I took off the summer and that fall, and I went to the Himalayas. I had an incredible experience there. I turned 60 that year. I had my birthday high in the Himalayas, where there's a lot of Buddhist wisdom around suffering and the meaning of life. I had a silent retreat in upstate New York, where I received so much wisdom. In 3 days of silence, I had 45 pages of notes, understanding about my life and about life in general. I outlined another book, which I'm writing now, in that silent retreat. I worked with a coach for the first time, and I went to the Amazon rainforest. Again, all of it was around healing. And so in my ayahuasca journey, I went to learn about healing, and one of my many visions that night, I'll share 2 of them. So the first one was, I saw a long line of people standing under the hot sun. and they're waiting to get a hug from a tiny woman at the end of the line. And I recognized her right away in my vision. I said, oh, that's Amma. Amma is this woman from India. She's known as the hugging saint. She travels all over the world. She's coming to Boston in August. Every year she comes. People stand in line, including my friend Michael. He stands in line 8, 12, 14 hours in the sun just to get a hug from Amma. Right? And then people get that hug and then they walk away in tears. They experience unconditional love from this woman who doesn't even speak English, doesn't really say anything to them. She just hugs them in a way. And the message that I got as I was being shown this was that all these people standing in line, they could be hugging each other. They do not need to wait and get a hug from her or some other person. That we humans are the cause of suffering in this world for each other and for other life. All unnecessary suffering on this planet comes from humans. Animals don't torture other animals. They don't destroy their ecosystems. It's only humans that do that, right? But also we are the source of healing for each other and for our planet and for other species. So the person next to you is every bit as capable of helping you heal as Amma. Right? So that was one vision. The second vision I got was these 4 letters floated into my vision. And as you know, I create acronyms for many things. And the message I was getting, there's like a voice speaking to you as you're lying there. I was lying on banana leaves under the sky next to a river deep inside the rainforest. The shaman, swishing and chanting around me. The voice was saying, here's the list. Here is what the world needs in order to heal. Here is what business needs in order to heal. It's the list. And then each of them came one by one. So L is for love. And the message was, everything we do in life must come from love. Every decision, every action should be rooted in love. Not greed, not jealousy, not fear, not anything else. It should come from love. Now, I find many business decisions are rooted in fear and greed. Fear of competition, fear of failure, and greed for more, more, more. Can we make that decision from love? Whether we're doing something for our customers, for our employees, for our society, can it be an expression of love? There are many ways that we can hurt each other. There's only one way we heal, that is through love. So fundamentally, I remind myself 10 times a day, every time I feel myself getting agitated or annoyed or anxious, am I coming from love right now? Or am I coming from some other emotion? The second one, I, was for innocence. We are all born innocent. There's no corrupt babies. Okay, every one of us comes into this world pristine and innocent, as a spirit, as a soul. But then we do get corrupted by the ways of the world. We get, by our culture, by our religion, whatever it might be, by our families, right? We get corrupted in a way. We are taught to use our intelligence to compete and to climb over each other, and in some cases to lie and cheat to get what you want, right? And we get this message that the world is a really dark and difficult place, and you have to just get ahead, win at any cost, etc., etc. All of those cultural messages I receive, right? Whether it's in TV or movies or books or by personal example of families or politicians or business leaders, right? That's the message we get. We get corrupted. Now, you don't have a choice when you're a baby or a child. You're born innocent and you get corrupted. No, you don't have a choice. But as an adult, you do have a choice. You must choose. When you have a choice, you have to choose. You can choose to remain in that corrupted state, or you can choose to return to innocence. What does that mean? I will never knowingly be the cause of unnecessary harm or suffering for another. You can extend that to other life forms as well. Right. I will choose to live with innocence. I will not be the source of suffering in this world. Because I think in the I Ching it says at the very core of us there dwells an innocent being. And all good comes from that innocent being. When we are connected to that, that's your true self. Not all the layers that we put on it. The true self is that innocent soul. We have to go back to that. A return to innocence. The third is S for simplicity. We make life too complicated. The most important things are simple. We lose sight of that. We get mired in complexity, get stuck in complexity. There's a famous quote by Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. He said, I would not give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but I'd give my life for the simplicity on the other side of complexity. And that's what we mean, the true simplicity that comes from understanding deeply what really matters, attaining mastery, right? How can we keep a focus on what really matters? It's love, it's family, it's purpose, it's impact, etc. And then the last one, T, is for truth. Truth is fundamental. Without truth, there can be no peace. Think about South Africa at the end of apartheid. They had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Why? Because without the truth being acknowledged about what had happened under the decades of apartheid, how much people had been tormented and how much they had suffered at the hands of that system and those people. If you do not acknowledge that truth, you cannot heal, and there would be a civil war in that country between blacks and whites. But because they had that commission, the white people were able to acknowledge what happened, beg forgiveness, atone for that, right? And the black people were able to say, yes, I forgive you, and now we can move forward as one. So truth is fundamental, and in our world today, truth seems to have lost all meaning. We have forgotten what truth is. The truth is fundamental. It's one of the core principles of life. Gandhi, his autobiography was called My Experiments with Truth. Truth is the highest value, and truth and love, right? Those two. So love and truth are the sort of the outside holders of this, and innocence and simplicity in the middle. So that was the message that came to me and through me, and I'm still trying to understand the depth of that message. But I think each of us can apply that in our own lives. Live by the list. Operate from love. Go back to your innocence. Keep things simple, and never, never, ever tell a lie. Always be committed to seeking the truth. It's not always easy to find the truth, but always be seeking the truth. So the two things I say to entrepreneurs and young people and everybody: live by the list and work on healing your wounds and traumas. We all carry wounds and traumas. The book I'm writing now is ultimately about healing yourself, going through 7 steps: know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, choose your life, express yourself, become whole, and heal yourself. Right? And that ultimately, if we don't heal our own wounds and traumas, we end up being the source of suffering for other people and for ourselves. Life is hard, life is traumatic, bad things happen to all of us as children, as adults, and it leaves an imprint on us. And we cannot change that episode. We cannot change the past, but we can change how it impacts us today. If we heal from it, then we can become wounded healers. The Japanese have a beautiful metaphor called kintsugi. When a piece of pottery breaks, they don't throw it away. They put it back together using gold dust and glue. Okay? And now it's a beautiful work of art, and it is stronger than the original piece of pottery because you have strengthened it along its fault lines where it was weakest. Likewise, when we have a trauma and we heal it, we can become the wounded healer. We can experience post-traumatic growth, where we are stronger because we had that trauma and we healed it than if we never had the trauma in the first place. And now we can become the source of healing for others.
Hey Rashina, when can we expect your book to be published?
So this one is called Healing Leaders, 7 Steps to Recovery of Self. We are trying to finish the manuscript by next month in August and then get a publisher. So sometime in 2025 is when we expect that book to come out. We've already been teaching programs, executive ed programs based on that. A 3-day program. It's a very deep experience. There's a lot of vulnerability and openness and tears. The experience is pretty profound.
We will be eager to read it.
Sure.
Yeah.
And my last book is called Awaken. I wrote my autobiography last year, Awaken, The Path to Purpose, Inner Peace and Healing, my own story. It's my 16th book, but I had never written about myself in any of my other books. I always wrote about companies and other leaders and ideas. And I always kept myself out of my own books. But now I finally realized that the books that have had the biggest impact on me are very personal books. The author shares their personal experience. Everybody can relate to that. Even though my story is very unique and different, and yet we're all human and there's a universality to our experiences as well. everybody can connect to other people's experiences too.
From reading your books, I know that it's really hard to have personal, or what I mean is organizations that are awakened if we don't have leaders who've been through this healing process, right? So I think it's really important to have solid things to work with as a as something you're
Yeah.
going to start working from. So we would really like to thank you for your time here and all the insights and wisdom and stories you shared with us. This is a really great honor for us to have you here. And we believe that everyone who listens to this is going to go looking for one of your books or any other way in which they can get in touch with you.
Sure. Well, I think if anybody is inspired or moved by these ideas, they should join the movement. You will find a community there. You'll find your tribe, as you say. You'll find a source of many ideas and a lot of wisdom. We have chapters. We have one in Mexico City, very, very vital chapter. We also have Conscious Capitalism Inc., which is our nonprofit based in the US. We have a CEO summit every October, which is a wonderful experience for everybody. And at Tecnológico de Monterrey, where I'm now a faculty member, we also have the Conscious Enterprise Center. And we offer many programs, including a Journey to Conscious Capitalism 2-day program. We offer this Healing Leaders program, which is a deep immersive experience, and many other programs as well. So I encourage people to look for the Conscious Enterprise Center at Tech, look for consciouscapitalism.org, look for Conscious Capitalism Mexico, and my website is rajsisodia.com. You can find lots of information there as well.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Raj.
You are very welcome. Thank you for having me.